Thank you. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Jonathan Strutt, one of our wonderful young faculty from the Division of Emergency Medicine and Child Abuse. Jonathan came to us from background as an Iowanian from the University of Iowa for undergraduate medical school at Dartmouth and Brown, and residency at Washington University. He then did his Peds Emergency Medicine Fellowship at Children's in Minnesota and joined us several years ago. He's been pretty active with our group, taking on a number of responsibilities within the hospital. He's done some service as Kawasaki's and difficult airway task forces and continues that work. He's also a site investigator for a number of regional and national research consortiums on behalf of our group as well. His main interest is something he's talking about today, pediatric medical device innovation, and he has a number, it's interesting, he has a number of mentees that are biomedical engineering students, and we'll be speaking today about his experience with the medical device innovation program. In addition, Gwenyth Fischer, the wonderful member of the Division of Critical Care, who's also the leader of the Pediatric Device Consortium. So for the time being, I'm going to be quiet and I'll step back and let them start. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ron. A mentor of mine once told me that the highest honor you can receive is for your own institution to invite you to speak, because they actually know what you have to say. So thank you for the honor. And I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Ron Furnival's retirement at the end of the month. I think I can speak for our division when I say we're all grateful for the outstanding program of the emergency department and everything that you've built here at Masonic, and you will be greatly missed. So thank you. So before I start, I just wanted to let you know that this is by no means a success story, but I think that learning from your mistakes and failures is probably the best type of learning that you can have, and learning from other people's mistakes and failures is even better. So hopefully you guys will get something out of this talk. Innovation has always fascinated me because it allows me to express my creativity, which is something I highly value. And during my training, I got another great piece of advice for my academic career, which is that there are two kinds of projects you work on, ones that you do for your boss and ones that you do for yourself. And for me, innovation falls into that latter category. So we have no disclosures to talk about with financial relationships or any off-label use of medications or investigational products. I will begin the first part of the talk discussing the roadmap for pediatric medical device innovation. I plan to lay out a framework for developing an idea into a medical device using one device that I have been working on as an example. And then Gwenyth Fischer will discuss current medical device resources and funding opportunities available to us here at the University of Minnesota. So innovation can come really from anywhere and anyone, and I hope to introduce you this framework not only for developing ideas, but for taking the next step toward creating a final product. And to lead you through this roadmap, I will be discussing my attempt at developing a novel medical device to illustrate the opportunities for innovation here at the U. Like most of you listening, I don't have a background in engineering, so my hope is that for those of you who may have been toying with an idea or thinking about doing it, can use my experience and learn from my mistakes in order to find your own success. And here I've mapped out 4 of these key areas as essential for innovation development, and my hope is that these will help guide any potential projects through the development process. So my journey first began back in my fellowship when I was trying to come up with a scholarly project. I found that a very common complaint in the emergency department is parental concern for dehydration when your child is having vomiting or diarrhea. They will often come to see us in the emergency department and have concerns about dehydration. So as you all are aware, weight loss is the gold standard when it comes to assessing for dehydration. And often we don't have a recent weight for comparison, so we must rely on several alternate diagnostic signs to assess for levels of dehydration. There are many clinical scoring systems which assess for dehydration, which use all of the various clinical markers. one of which actually was developed by the current CEO of Children's Minnesota, Mark Orlick. Most of the time, patients actually do really well, though, and do not require IV fluids, have mild or moderate dehydration, can usually be managed with oral rehydration at home. So for my research project, my goal was to create a way for parents to help diagnose dehydration more reliably at home, and that way they could avoid having to make the trip into the emergency department if it wasn't necessary. So with this in mind, I came up with a device idea, which I'll get into how I did that later, but basically it was a smartphone app which could assess for dehydration. So now that I had the destination in mind, I soon realized that the journey is half, if not the whole battle. So usually when you think of a groundbreaking product or an invention, you only see the end result. So it's natural to assume that the road from idea to impact is straight and easy. Often, however, reality is much more complicated. During my fellowship, when I first came up with the idea, I could not get mentorship support for the project. I kept hearing the same feedback. The scope was too big, funding was not available, the resources to develop the app weren't in place. So ultimately, I had to abandon the project during my fellowship in lieu of something more realistic, which I'm sure many of you who've gone through fellowships have had the same kind of experience. So then I joined the faculty here at the University of Minnesota, and I did that partly because I wanted to take advantage of all the academic resources available here. And over the first couple of years, I attempted to do that. I applied for 8 separate grants to get funding for my app development, all of which failed. They all had similar feedback for me, which was that they wanted to see a proof of concept or a prototype before investing in the idea. And I'm not a software developer or engineer, so that made it very difficult for me, of course. After I had many failures at trying to secure grant funding, I was encouraged to apply for a program called MinReach. MinReach was an NIH evaluation and commercialization venture, which provides funding specifically for development of novel devices or therapeutics, so it was right up my alley. Proposals were submitted and selected for a workshop, which helped us better define the scope of the project, map out the intended market, and identify any existing competition. Ultimately, I didn't end up securing any funding. Only one group did at the end, but it did teach me a kind of things that investors were looking for, so it was very useful. And along the way, I discovered the OTC at the University of Minnesota, which I think is much more friendly to entrepreneurs and faculty who don't have a lot of experience and time to do all of this background research on their own. So, and actually I think that the MinReach program as it stood is no longer active or receiving funds. If not, it might be something more specific to different fields. So, but the Office of Technology Commercialization does help facilitate much of the same background work to help determine if a project or idea is worth commercializing. So it's a useful thing to start off with if you have an idea for a new device. Seeing that many faculty members don't often have the expertise or time to perform this type of market research on their own, they have a staff of people who can help facilitate this work for you. And by disclosing your intellectual property to the OTC, they will meet with you, discuss your work, assign a team to help determine the commercial potential of your idea and whether a patent is feasible or not. They can also connect you with other researchers or companies in your work, in your field of study. So it is a very useful resource here at the university. So my key take-home point number 2 is that new ideas almost never get created on their own. They often involve building upon previous ideas and making incremental improvements rather than great leaps. This was definitely true for my Capillary Refill app. There have been several studies which explore various clinical signs that help identify dehydration. As I mentioned, there's a lot of scoring systems which use all the various clinical signs and add up points together to determine a mild, moderate, or severe dehydration category for the patient. But for individual specific signs of dehydration, capillary refill alone had been shown to be the most reliable predictor or indicator of severe dehydration. And then I came across a paper in 2007 which used a novel method of videography to record capillary refill time of patients with dehydration. The idea was that you would make a video recording of a provider performing the capillary refill assessment, and then a computer would calculate the time for the capillary refill time. The authors found that they could reliably differentiate severe dehydration based on capillary refill time alone using this method. So when I read this in 2014, I knew that you could apply this technology to the smartphone, and then you could have parents performing dehydration assessments at home, and it would be a very useful tool. So all I needed to do now was place that last block on top of which is often easier said than done, of course. So having that idea or insight is one thing, but turning it into something tangible is entirely different. And I found that the road forward can be very lonely if you travel it alone. So collaboration is key to forging new paths forward, and often leads you down roads that you never knew were available to you. So with my flash of insight with a CAP app, or at least what I thought was a flash of insight, I was dreaming of fame and fortune, often like young entrepreneurs do. I wanted to take all the credit and try to do it all on my own, but I learned that quickly trying to secure my own funding without any experience in this field was very difficult, and they were not interested in just ideas. And so I quickly learned that people wanted to see that I had expertise in software engineering to know if this idea was possible. They wanted to see a prototype. They wanted to know that I understood the market. So I learned that being open to collaboration only increased my chance of success and doesn't necessarily diminish the rate of return. So I was introduced to the biomedical engineering field through Gwenyth Fischer, who had recommended that I get involved in the engineering department at the university. They have a yearly group of students who are undergoing a senior design course, and they need clinical advisors for their projects. So I signed up to become a clinical advisor, and my first group of undergraduates, I pitched to them my idea of the Capillary Refill App, and they were really excited about it. They designed a working prototype and a standardized apparatus for measuring the capillary refill time. You know, my idea was just the app, but they, being engineers, of course, wanted to develop a tangible product. So they came up with a standardized platform for the app to take the video, and then a standardized pressure device, which can apply a consistent amount of pressure to take the capillary refill. And the device ultimately did lack some consistency, and it was a little cumbersome to use and not very generalizable for use at home, because you had to buy the device, obviously. So, but the concept itself was proven, and it kind of started me down the road and got me a little bit more excited about the project again. So I think the biomedical engineering design course is a great way to get involved if you're like me and interested in the creative work of innovation and engineering, but don't necessarily have the background to develop these ideas from the ground up. Usually you have about a group of 5 students who come into your clinic, and you introduce them to a clinical problem, or just show them around, and they can develop their own clinical problems and spend the year developing a device that can help you solve the problem. It's a very rewarding experience, and usually a great way to get involved peripherally in the medical device field. So I would highly recommend it. Now that I had experience with collaborating, I decided to jump in and reach out even further. So I sent an email out to the head of the computer science department asking about faculty or postdoctorates who may be interested in working with me on my CAP app project. I was then put in touch with a master's student who expressed interest in the product. Together, we developed a grant proposal for the Department of Pediatrics Progressive Grant, which I was grateful for. We secured $5,000 for our initial award funding. And we used those grant funds to develop an early stage program which could detect fingernails in a frame and track color over time. So we started with our initial prototype just to kind of get people excited about it, and to let people know that this kind of device was something that would work and was possible. So we were lucky enough to be able to present our initial findings at a MedFuse conference, which is a technology medical device conference put on every year in the fall. We did that back in 2019. So the last area I wanted to touch on is how one should go about thinking about idea creation. And when it comes to medical device design, simple is usually the best, and new ideas are often born of necessity. I'm sure everyone remembers from that picture there, the scene in Apollo 13 where Tom Hanks and NASA had to design a filter to help rid the ship of CO2 so they could make it back to Earth. And this example, as well as the TV show MacGyver, are how I like to think about innovation and idea generation. You take a problem, use what you have to solve the problem, and then you figure out how to make it better. It doesn't really take any big leaps in understanding or research. Often it can come from small things, or just making something a little bit more device specific that you usually would work around, find ways to work around during procedures or things like that. So in this sense, anyone can become an innovator, and I've got some good examples of those kind of devices which were created in a similar way. So this is a device called a CATS extractor. Now for foreign body removal, oftentimes we'll take a small Foley catheter, usually 6 French, and insert it past the object in the nasal cavity, inflate the balloon, and pull it out. Well, someone decided that, you know, not everyone either would think of using a Foley catheter, or maybe it's just a little easier to have a device that's specifically designed for this. You can grab a hold of it, you know, give it instructions on exactly how to perform the procedure. So it's a little easier for those who aren't as experienced. So, you know, this is the MacGyver method of removing a foreign body with the Foley catheter is now designed into a nice little device that you can sell and commercialize. So someone saw that opportunity and went for it. It's very simple. You guys are all familiar with IO needles, I'm sure, during your PALS training. There's the manual ones, which are great and they get the job done, but often emergency room doctors wanted something a little faster, something that was more reliable, something that people wouldn't have to struggle or, you know, apply their own force to get in. So 2 emergency physicians created the Easy IO. Again, a simple design, just improved incrementally on the old device, and I thought it was a great idea. So the last one is a more recent invention. It's called LifeFlow, and basically it's designed to administer rapid push boluses for pediatric shock patients. It was designed by pediatric intensivists who wanted to improve the fluid administration. You know, our old method of using a 3-way stopcock and push-pulling fluids with the bolus syringes is a good method, but often, you know, it's cumbersome. It takes you adjusting the stopcock back and forth. And what they realized was that if you could design a device which administer the fluid and then automatically refill the syringe when you let go of the handle, you could improve the speed of your rapid push boluses. And so again, it's a simple design, but solves a common problem, and is a clever idea. So with all this in mind, and you know, creating devices and being in the innovation field on my mind, I was talking to my colleague Jeff Louie, who we had a similar idea when it came to the reinsertion of G buttons. And so this kind of encapsulates you know, the work that I've done and the things that I've told you about the key areas of innovation here at the during my time at the U. So Dr. Louie and I wanted to come up with a way to help replace dislodged G buttons. And this is based on a technique that many of us in the emergency department employ for G tubes that have been out for a while. Sometimes it can be difficult, or the stoma site is a little tight getting the G button back in place. Then parents often come to us to help us provide that service. And so sometimes we find that the device itself is a little giving, and when you try and apply a little bit of pressure, it just bends and makes it difficult to insert. So we find ourselves putting the end of a cotton swab into the opening of the G button, kind of like a stylet, to provide a little bit more rigidity. And so we partnered together with a med-peds resident who has some interest in medical device innovation. And actually, over the Christmas last year, got a 3D printer, so that was convenient. So he developed a stylet that you could insert into the G button and attach to an aspiration syringe so that we could check, just make sure that the placement was correct. And it proved to be a useful device. He has gone on to make some improvements on that, including adding a pH strip so that when we aspirate, we can make sure that we're in the appropriate location as well, you know, as improve the first pass insertion. So just some examples of things that we are continuing to do and kind of illustrate all the keys to success that I've been discussing today. So, you know, in conclusion, the road to innovation is often winding. Rarely do new ideas take giant leaps in our understanding of problems. And it is always easier to make that leap holding someone else's hand. So you're probably already solving many of these problems in your own clinical work, but you just have to know where to look, and coming up with new devices does let you use that creative part of your brain, and it's not as hard as it seems if you open yourself up to collaboration within the university and with within other fields in the academic world here at the U. So now I will turn over the rest of this talk to Gwenyth Fischer to discuss innovation opportunities available to us here at the University of Minnesota.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm Gwenyth Fischer. I'm one of the pediatric critical care physicians here at the U. I'm also the director of the Pediatric Device Innovation Consortium, or more commonly known as the PDIC here at the university. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that resource, which is available to all of you. And then also I'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that are university-wide. So first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about pediatric medical device development in general and why it's so important for all of us to be thinking about this. I think this is a really good example here, but the FDA has estimated that pediatric medical device development is about 10 years behind the adult medical device development. And this is one example. So a lot of you may have seen the Berlin heart. That's the picture on the left here. And this is a fantastic device. It's FDA approved. We're lucky to have it. It absolutely saves lives. But you can see here that the pump is on the outside of the body, and it's controlled by this giant thing called an ICUS, which has to be attached to the child at all times. So these kiddos sometimes stay in the PICU for a year, sometimes even a year and a half waiting for heart transplant, and aren't able to leave because they're attached to this giant thing. There's also a lot of issues with those cannulas and the pumps themselves being outside the body. But again, we're lucky to have it. On the right-hand side, though, is one example of many of what is available to an adult patient. So this is one example of a left ventricular assist device for adults. And as you can see, the patient has a much smaller control device. They can put it in a backpack, they can walk around, they can be discharged from the hospital and have a relatively normal life while they're either waiting for transplant or they're getting better. So I think this is just a very stark example of how the technology is a little bit behind in pediatrics. So this is another way to look at that gap. This is, as an example, again, the ventricular assist devices. On the left are the current adult options. And every time I give this talk, I have to update this because they're constantly adding new investigational devices and new devices are getting approved. On the right-hand side are the current pediatric options. So I mentioned the Berlin heart. There's one other that's available that can be used on larger children, and one investigational device currently being looked at that's been in clinical trials now for quite a while. So you can see just the stark difference between what's available for kids and what's available for adults. So the main reason that we are behind adult medical device technology is because we just have a much smaller pool of patients that we're working with. Not surprisingly, there's a much smaller group of children and teenagers that are part of our pediatric market, but also those kids tend to be a lot healthier than the over 15 crowd. So this market is important not only for companies looking to make money, but also in terms of doing clinical trial testing. This is another way to look at this. So the adult versus the pediatric device market. On the left-hand side, this is the global adult interventional cardiology market. So it's estimated right now in 2020 to be about $25 billion. So that's, if you're building a new adult interventional cardiology device, that is the market that you're looking at. On the right-hand side is the pediatric interventional cardiology market. So still considerably a good market for peds, but it is under $1 billion. So if you're a large company that makes products in this area, it's very hard to tell your shareholders that you're going to make a pediatric device when you could be working in a much, much larger market. Also, as pediatric providers, we're very used to what I think of as jerry-rigging. So this is an example of something I took a picture of a few weeks ago in the ICU. Classic pediatric nurse innovating around her patient. It's just a simple way of handling a diaper rash. No medical device, just something she jerry-rigged with some oxygen in a paper cup. I think if you all think back to your work with pediatric patients, you'll realize how much you jerry-rig during the course of the day. And also all the medical devices and even drugs that you're using that have not been FDA approved and are not clinically tested for kids. And we're just used to operating in this zone. So the Pediatric Device Innovation Consortium was started about 10 years ago when I started thinking about this market gap in pediatrics compared to the adults and wanting to really help close that gap. The PDIC functions in a lot of different ways around medical devices. Our primary function is really to help faculty members and also community members who are interested in innovating in pediatrics medical devices. So we act as an incubator for medical device development. We also help pediatric inventors network with other people. So Jonathan mentioned looking for resources for software development and other engineering resources. Those are things that we work with pediatric inventors to network around the university and around the Minneapolis community to do. We also do a lot of inventor education around the commercialization process. We do a lot of project management, meaning that medical device development requires a lot of pivoting frequently. As Jonathan mentioned, it's not a straight road to success. So helping inventors understand how they can pivot when they hit a roadblock. We also assist with providing industry expertise, especially in those later phases of commercialization. And we do some advocacy at the state and national level for better resources for pediatric device development. So I built the Pediatric Device Innovation Consortium here for a lot of reasons, but the primary reason really was that the University of Minnesota has a very strong history of medical device development, particularly in pediatrics. So if you look to the right, these are some of the biggest inventions of the modern medical era, and they were all from here. So that's the Implanter device that closes heart holes, the Bakken pacemaker, which was initially made for both pediatric and adult patients, a heart valve that was developed here. Of course, Dr. Lillehei's work with ECMO and congenital heart patients. And then on the left, you see some of the newer devices that were really just made in the past couple years that are brand new, but are also already helping patients. So the one on the far left is for snoring. It's an app for assisting people who have consistent snoring. The top one on the left is being used in patients already, called Mintize. This is, if you've ever had your jaw wired shut, this is the new modern version of that, which is much more comfortable and easier for patients. So the list goes on, but these are just a few examples of products that have been made here at the University of Minnesota that are highly impactful to patients. So the other reason to build a pediatric device consortium here was the general community of inventors here at Minnesota, which is huge. We're considered one of the top 3 largest medical device communities in the nation, the other 2 being Boston and the Silicon Valley. And if you look to the left, these are some companies that you probably recognize the names of. These are just some of the top 10 biggest ones here in Minnesota, but there's actually over 900 health technology companies in Minnesota, which is a huge number for how big we are. Over 600 of these are very directly medical device oriented. We have a huge economy that's very reliant on medical device, $23 billion impact here in Minnesota, and over 167,000 medical device professionals here in Minnesota, a lot of them who really want to help pediatric medical device developers. So it's a great community to work in. The university itself has launched, by my count, 11 medical device technologies just last year. So within the Pediatric Device Innovation Consortium, we don't focus on a particular area of medicine, but we focus on impact. So what are the things that we can work on that are going to eventually have the biggest pediatric patient impact? If you look at our portfolio to the left, you'll see that we've worked in a lot of different areas, a lot of major different medical specialties with a lot of different medical specialists. And to the right, these are just some examples of areas that we actually helped with unmet needs, meaning that someone, a parent or a community member told us that their child or someone they knew had a problem in an area, and we worked to help develop a medical device around that problem. So the way we operate, we take anything from a very early need or challenge that a parent or a community member sees when working with a pediatric patient, all the way up to we've worked with devices that have already been launched into a company or even industry members who have a device that they're working on that they have a specific area that they'd like us to help with. So we take these ideas and needs from clinicians and researchers. We also take them from patients and families in what we call our community discovery program. And we work with industry and external partners who want to be working in the pediatric realm or have an idea that they aren't able to use through the normal channels of medical device industry. So we take those ideas and needs and we put them through our 3 different programs. Each of those areas looks a little bit different depending on what it is. So for instance, as Jonathan mentioned, when we are brought a very early idea, sometimes we help matchmake that inventor to a different program within the university to help develop that idea and help develop the inventor to understand the commercialization process a little bit more. Sometimes it's a very simple need, like they need to be connected to an animal lab or help understand who might be able to help them with the clinical trial. So it's very case by case. But ultimately, our goal is always to look for the pediatric benefit and impact on those products. In order to do that, we take guidance and assistance from many different people within the academic, industry, and community areas. We work with a team of advisory board members, mostly from industry here in Minnesota, but also throughout the country. We have clinical help from a variety of different places, mostly from the university, but also from several other different hospitals with different clinical perspectives and expertise. We get engineering assistance, meaning prototyping and specific engineering problem solving from a lot of the local companies as well, and also from some of the groups within the university that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Product development, which means you have a prototype and now you need to finalize that prototype and really think about how does it fit into the actual workplace? Is it ergonomic? Is it solving the problem you wanted to solve? Intellectual property, which Jonathan touched on a little bit with TechCom. So this is understanding how you can protect your idea and understanding how it might be commercialized and protected through intellectual property disclosures and patents. Regulatory, referring mostly to the FDA, but sometimes also to some of the European and Asian systems. And we do have some FDA consultants who help us with that. And then finally, business, which is in some ways the keystone to all of this. You have a product, how do you actually commercialize this into a product that can be either licensed out to a business or turned into a business itself so that it can reach patients? So the PDIC has been around for about 9 years now. We've awarded almost $1 million now to 29 projects. We partner with the Office of Discovery and Translation within the CTSI to do that. Those projects have since brought on well over $500,000 of follow-on funding from other sources that we are aware of. We have licensed out 4 different products to startup companies, and 3 projects now have reached clinical practice. But I will say, while these are successful numbers, that because of what we're doing, we often have to be very patient. It takes up to 10 years sometimes for a very innovative new type of product to get to the market, and it can be very costly. So some of the products that we've started working on back in 2012, 2014, we are still moving along those timelines. We do work in global health as well, and this is more recently we've expanded into some global health projects that don't follow the typical regulatory and commercialization patterns here. So we now have products that are being used in the US, China, Cameroon, and Uganda, and we're hoping to expand that once COVID is finished and we can get back out there. So I thought it would be helpful to present a few concrete examples of what we're doing, just to give you a little bit better understanding of how we might be able to work with you if you are thinking about innovating in pediatric device. So this is kind of a classic example, this first one. This is an implantable heart valve technology. This was made by Dr. Tranquillo and Zishan Syed several years ago. We've been working with them for almost a decade now to work to try to get this product out to pediatric patients. This is essentially a growing heart valve, and it was actually spun out of the University of Minnesota to a company in 2017. We continue to work with this group, trying to figure out how to best do a clinical trial and how to best get this through some of the regulatory challenges that it's going to be faced with, because it is such a transformative product. But we consider this one a success since it's on its way to commercialization. This was a very different product. So this is one of our global health products made by Dr. Slusher and Dr. Bjorklund in our pediatrics department. This is a bubble CPAP device that was actually modified so it could be used in older children who are experiencing pneumonia and very limited resources. This was successful in that we were able to get a safety study published. We were able to build some open source videos and able to get the word out about how this product can be actually built from any place with a limited source environment, so that providers were able to make their own and help work with their own children at the source. So this one we continue to work on. The next phase will be building a multi-site trial and adding an oxygen mixer for younger patients. So this was also a very different type of project. This project came through our community program, where we get needs and ideas from families and from parents, and sometimes even from patients, around challenges that they're seeing around their children's medical care. So a parent approached us through this program and said, my child does not do well at the dentist. I don't want to take them there. Every time I feel like we're traumatized by the experience, is there anything that you guys could do about this? So we worked with the Medical Device Center Innovation Fellows Program, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. And through a series of investigations and figuring out what the actual problem was, they eventually came up with this idea, which is an interactive app that works individually at dentist's office to help familiarize the child with the dentist's office, with the tools that are going to be used. And the software is actually being used now in some dental clinics here in Minneapolis. You can actually go to their website and find out if your dentist office has this available. And it's a free app that you can download a few weeks before your dental appointment to help your kid get used to that dentist office. So they did their initial studies looking at this and found that 50% of their visits are faster, and 63% of kids are easier to work with. And through this initial data, we figured out that while the patient and their family was their first customer, the second customer was actually the dental clinic, who was not otherwise really able to work with these kids, and saw that a lot of these families never returned because they had such a poor experience. So being able to help dental clinics and the families and parents made this a real success. There's just some more pictures of the kid on the right is getting some help from Mimi, the hippo, to help her learn how to open her mouth for the dentist clinic. And then on the left, these are individual dentist clinics introducing the individual staff that the patient will work with once he or she gets there. So finally, the last case study that I wanted to just mention, this one again was a very different product, just really highlighting that we do a lot of diverse work in medical device. This one was actually a telemedicine solution for congenital heart disease screening in low resource settings, really focusing on China to start. This is a product developed by Dr. Ambrose and a couple other engineering folks outside of the university. They ended up developing One Heart Health, which is a nonprofit organization around this software program that they developed. And now they're screening thousands of kids using this app, and have been awarded some further funding to develop this, but this was another success. So this graph looks very complicated, but really this is a bullseye, and this is how we think about every product that we take on. Essentially, every product starts at the very end of the bullseye and goes inward towards patient access, and that's always our goal. So these are always all of our products here in different forms, but the main point to take away here is some of these that are going from the end of the bullseye into the main part of the bullseye take years and years to do this. And so we're not a typical grant program in that we don't just hand over funding and then move on. We often work with inventors for years and years before and after we award them funding, so that we can get through some of these stages, which start with a pre-concept stage before we even have a product, all the way up to manufacturing and then to patient access. So finally, one of the last things we do is try to bring pediatric inventors together. It's tough. There's a lot of barriers to pediatric medical device development and medical device development in general. And we find that bringing them together to help them work through their problems together, sometimes they form projects together, learning from each other has been really helpful. So up until this year, we had a yearly breakthrough event to try to help catalyze some of these relationships. In 2019, the Breakthrough Collaborative was called Cracking the Partnership Code, and we really focused on how industry and academic groups could work together in pediatric innovation, and there were a number of projects that came from that. We have attendance from this that's really international. We pair ourselves with the Design a Medical Device Conference, which is great, and we get a lot of industry members who come from that event and join us for the evening for this event. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get back to this next year. And in fact, we are going to be, assuming that we're past the COVID point, we're hopefully going to be co-hosting the AdvaMed event in 2021, which is an international medical device conference paired with the Pediatric Medical Device Conference. So very excited to hopefully be doing that next year, and look out for your invitation to that event. So now I'm just going to very quickly go through some of the university-wide technology development resources. I want to make sure that all of our pediatric faculty really feel comfortable with all the different options that they have, because we really are very fortunate that we are very supported for technology development here at the U. So the first one is the Earl Bakken Medical Devices Center. Hopefully many of you have heard of this. It's over by Freshie on the East Bank. This is a place where you can really get a lot of the engineering that you might need to start a project. And at any point, if you're wondering where to find these resources, please contact the PDIC. We're happy to help you direct to the right place at the U. Recently, this group was featured in the Star Tribune. They called them going full-on MacGyver against COVID-19. They made a makeshift ventilator, which they've made thousands of these now, which have kind of gone into the state and national stockpile in case we really get ourselves into trouble. It was nice to know that we were never going to run out of ventilators. This is a very simple option, but this is what they're best at. They are rapid prototypers. They help with industry collaboration. They have a professional level innovation fellows program with people who are very excited to work on projects with clinicians, and they host the Design a Medical Devices Conference. The CTSI is another really good resource for pediatric medical device or technology inventors. They host a number of projects and also are a good resource in trying to find other things at the university. They have a translational grant program for folks that have something that's a little bit too early to be called development, but is headed towards a stage of translation. They also have the Committee for Pharmaceutical Development, which I know a few of the pediatric faculty have worked with. This is a great program if you're thinking about developing a drug, if you are working on developing a drug, or even if you're developing a drug delivery system or device, they have funding and also a lot of really great industry advisors who can help you through that process. There's a translational product development fund called the TPDF that's similar to the PDIC funding, except it's for both peds and adults, but offers a lot of great funding for projects that are headed towards commercialization. And then the PDIC also works with them in conjunction with the TPDF funding. The Institute for Engineering and Medicine, also called IEM, has a brand new program that I'm very excited about called the Clinical Engagement Program. The simple idea behind this is you're a busy clinician, you have some great ideas, but you don't have the time or the expertise to work on them. Just like Jonathan said, you can't really go it alone when it comes to medical device development. So they have a very simple form online that you can fill out, and they will help match you to an engineer somewhere in the university to help work on your project. And it may be an undergrad, it may be a faculty member. It just depends on what the type of project is and what stage you're in and what the needs are. So that is a great new program that I'm very excited about. Jonathan mentioned TechCom, formerly OTC. They just changed their name. They also have a ton of resources for inventors and are also the place to go if you think you've invented new technology. So in order to help, they ask that you fill out a new technology disclosure. From there, they will help manage that intellectual property, meaning that they will help understand if there are other technologies out there that might interfere with your intellectual property. They'll help do patent searches for you. They'll help do market searches for you. And of course, then in the later stages of developing a technology here at the U, they help with licensing and formation of startup companies. Even if you're thinking that you might be interested in forming a startup company at some point, it's worth a conversation with them. They tell me time and time again, please send people to us early so that we can have these conversations very early on. Beyond just those particular roles that they have here at the university, they also have a lot of great inventor resources on their webpage, and we'll also just sit down with you to talk about commercialization in general. And then one of the other larger educational resources for inventors in general at the university is called MinCorps. It was somewhat related to MinReach, which has now, I think, pivoted to something else. But MinCorps specifically says that they want to translate your innovation to a fundable, high-growth business using the lean startup approach. That is their goal. And in order to do so, they have a fantastic program called the Value Proposition Design Program, which is very similar to what Jonathan was describing. They help you understand who your customer is. They help you with scope. They will help you do interviews with potential customers. They help understand if your design is what is needed in the market. They do project coaching. They have just general commercialization education resources and conferences. All of this stuff is free or very cheap to attend. And just a particular plug, if you're a woman or even if you're not a woman, they have a fantastic Innovators Conference where they feature female innovators, entrepreneurs, and some really, really great speakers and workshops for women who are interested in inventing and being part of the innovation groups here at the U. So that's featured out of the Carlson School of Business, but works a lot with clinicians. So that's all I had for today. If you have any questions about innovating at the U, please contact me directly, or you can email us through thepdic.org, and we're more than happy to go through any of these resources and point you in the right direction. Thanks.
Gwen, we do have a question coming in that's from one of our interns. She says, interesting presentation, a couple of questions. It does appear that entirely novel ideas are unlikely to get funding and relevant support. In building on previous innovations, how does a potential innovator strike a balance between developing their new idea and, quote, stealing a previous innovator's idea? And second question, is there a national equivalent of the PDIC?
Yes, okay, so I will answer the second question first. There are national equivalents to the PDIC. If you go to the FDA website, there are 5 different programs that they support. They are all on the coasts, which was another reason that we wanted to build the PDIC here. There's nothing in the middle of the country. All of whom have some FDA money where they are able to support pediatric invention. So there's one in California, one in Texas, a couple on the East Coast. And so if you just go to the FDA website, that's under Pediatric Consortiums. So that is another great national resource and probably the first place I'd look. As to the first question, if you have a novel idea and you have not made a prototype yet, that's usually prior to what the PDIC will fund directly. However, we do like to help those groups because they tend to be our future applicants to our program, figure out where the right place is to start. And often, like as Jonathan mentioned, one great resource is the senior design groups. There's two of them. One is out of mechanical engineering and one is out of biomedical engineering. Both groups have extremely smart graduate engineer level students who are very eager to help with your problem. So we'll often direct them to a program like that. Sometimes we direct them over to the medical device center. And often what a clinician most needs is just to be paired with an engineering group. So we can often help with that. Hopefully that answers the question.
And I'll add that the OTC, or now known as TechCom, is useful for helping define the scope of your idea and comparing it to other competitors or similar patents that may be, encroaching on the same type of intellectual property. But you can kind of flesh out whether or not it is something that is novel enough to warrant its own intellectual property, so that you can feel comfortable going forward with the idea as something new and unique.
Absolutely, and that is definitely the process that we try to encourage, is to think about the needs specifically that you are trying to solve. Often there are many products out there that don't solve a need that you can work around, but it's helpful to start from that place, and that's a whole separate presentation on my part. But rather, a lot of times we'll see people who have a product and they're looking for a place to put it. The easier way to do that is to start from what is the actual problem I'm trying to solve, and then build a device around that.
Great. We've got another question from Dr. Pianosi in our pulmonary division. He says, I enrolled in the value proposition design course. We're expected to contact 30 companies. I tried to contact all the big medical device companies listed on your slide, but it's a very indirect path. Either fill in a form online or divulge potentially patentable details of one's device. I never received any callback from 6 online requests. Is there a less convoluted path to contact companies via the U programs to discuss devices?
Yes. So if you call a medical device company directly, you're going to end up probably in some, corner intern office for the summer who has no idea how to actually put you in contact with anyone that will be helpful. So we have an industry advisory board that's happy to talk to inventors. So that's probably the easiest thing to do, is just contact us, and we can at least put you in contact with the folks that we work with. The other way to do this is there's a ton of networking events here in Minneapolis. There's dozens and dozens of groups that that cater to the medical device industry here. The biggest one is called Medical Alley. And if you go on Medical Alley's website, they have people there who can make you to pretty much any company within the Twin Cities that works with medical devices.
Great, thank you. Dr. Schleiss asked, since some devices enable better patient care efficiency, has UMP been a funding partner supportive in some projects?
That's a great question. And I mean, you could also apply that to Fairview. We have not had the opportunity yet to work with Fairview or UMP. But I think that as we all start to merge together, I'm hoping that that'll be a bigger opportunity for us. Fairview does work with some university level groups. They tend to be fairly far along. They usually have already launched a company and they're looking for clinical resources. But there is a Fairview Ventures group, which I have not had the opportunity to work with, but know that they have interacted with UMP and UMN before.
Making sure we don't have any more questions coming in the chat or in the Q&A.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment. One of the things I certainly learned early on in this presentation is the amount of persistence that one needs to have to get this done. And I would congratulate Jonathan and Gwen on having that kind of persistence, because this is as long a road as NIH grants or anything else. So congratulations on this great grand rounds.
I did just want to really highlight the tremendous, resources for trainees. I think our medical device fellowship has been a big draw for people both with engineering backgrounds, but also with people who don't have engineering backgrounds. The really cool thing about the medical device fellowship, as you guys touched on, is that it's multidisciplinary. So it has people from the business school and people who are kind of from all aspects of bringing a device to market. And I know that's been something that some of our fellows have participated in. We've had residents participate in that. I know one of the, and some of our trainees come in with incredible engineering expertise. The example that John Strutt showed is one of our mid-peds residents, Vidu Pandey, who's came in with some pretty impressive engineering background before his trainings. I think we're lucky to have, just sort of this really multifaceted group of people who come with varied expertise. And I think the, just breadth of what the university has to offer was really, from computer science to, all the different people we can connect with. So I think it's a wonderful kind of, illustration of being in a big academic center and a big university and not being afraid to reach out to all these different places. Thank you so much. It was a great talk.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy Wednesday.